Hello and welcome to HFMA Talk, the podcast for NHS Finance. I'm Alex Hunt, Content and Social Media Executive at the HFMA. This episode marks the start of our 2025 series. In the months ahead, we're excited to bring you more frequent episodes to help keep you informed on the latest NHS finance news, policy updates from the HFMA, and expert discussions on the key issues shaping the healthcare finance community. Stay tuned for an engaging year of HFMA Talk. In today's episode, Debbie Paterson, Senior Technical Manager at the HFMA, sits down with Lisa Robertson, Senior Policy Manager at the HFMA, to discuss the 2024-25 financial year-end process. They'll explore some of the key challenges facing finance teams and auditors, important considerations to help ensure a smooth year-end, and the HFMA resources available to support everyone through the process. So on that note, I shall now hand over to Debbie and Lisa.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our year-end podcast. My name's Debbie Paterson. I'm the Senior Technical Manager here at the HFMA, and I'll introduce my colleague Lisa.
Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Robertson. I'm a Senior Policy Manager here at the HFMA and work really closely with Debbie throughout our year-end process and trying to support you guys along the way. It does feel like only yesterday that we did a similar podcast a year ago talking about the year-end issue, so I'm sure some of the things we talk about will be quite similar to what you've heard before, but actually it's quite nice for us to have a reflect and a refresh on where we are at the moment, I think, isn't it, Debbie?
Absolutely, yes, it is. And it feels like we've been talking about the year end for quite a while now. We started off with our pre-accounts planning conference, which was at the end of January, which I think is a key part of the calendar for everyone, kicks off their year end. And we had a really good turnout again this year. We changed the format a bit. We had one day rather than two, and then followed that up with a load of webinars afterwards, which from our perspective seemed to work really well. Hopefully it went well from the delegates' perspective because they're the most important people in all of this. So I'll just to kick off this podcast with some reflections on the key messages from the pre-accounts planning conference. It's a relatively straightforward year this year, financial reporting wise, which is great. But as always, especially in the NHS, there are other complicating factors. Last week's announcements, we're recording this on the 18th of March. So last week's announcements about NHS England and the DHSC are obviously sending shockwaves through the system. Planning has yet to be put to bed, and it looks like there's going to be a financial reset, which will involve more planning. And as we all know, the financial pressures on the NHS mean that the year end is likely to have its moments again, I suspect. But from a financial reporting perspective, it's a year to make sure that the basics are right, that judgments and estimates are properly documented, that income is backed up with contracts and contract variations, that balances on the balance sheet are all known and documented, and that sort of thing. I think for me, the other message that I took from the pre-accounts planning conference was how complicated the financial management piece in the NHS is. I think it's hard enough to manage one NHS body's financial position, and that is relatively self-contained. But actually, there's a much bigger thing going on here that each provider is consolidated into a consolidated provider accounts. Each ICB is consolidated into the NHS England's accounts, and then the whole lot is consolidated into the Department of Health and Social Care accounts, which is a big consolidation effort and lots of adding up and taking away. But it's also lots of different financial metrics that are being judged at each stage. And I think it's really important that we understand, not in any great detail, but that to some extent that the department has different financial metrics, say to a provider, break even, relatively straightforward. For the department, there's all this stuff about Dell and Amy and revenue and capital and things like that. And so I think for me, the underlying message was that there is a bigger picture. It's really important to get financial forecasting right, because that then means that when all the numbers are added up, then hopefully the department will land on that pinhead of just underneath the various spending limits, not going a penny more, but making sure that the maximum amount of funding available to the NHS has been spent by the NHS. So it wasn't explicit in the conference, but there were just various comments made throughout that each finance team is playing its part in a much bigger picture, and that it's really important that everyone at least has some understanding of what the implications of local decisions are on the wider national picture. What do you think, Lisa? What were your thoughts from the conference?
As usual, it was a really good opportunity to get people together. I think for me, it's really kind of the questions, the engagement, the kind of thoughts that are shared in the comments that make it most valuable. And there were some absolutely brilliant questions and helpful bits of material that I think that we shared on the day. So even though we were not face to face, I think it still has that same sense of people being part of a community before they launch into something that they're kind of used to doing. So I think it was really helpful. I chaired a couple of sessions in particular, actually. And the first session that I chaired was around environmental sustainability reporting. So I know you said it's quite a quiet year, financial reporting this year, but I think this is one area that is changing. So we've got the addition of the Phase 2 Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which is a mouthful as well, in the annual report. And I know last year we saw Phase 1 introduced around the governance pillar. But I provide the policy support actually to our governance and audit committee. So we've been talking a lot about reflecting on 23-24 and this year. And there were quite a lot of comments coming through from auditors that this was one area last year that was particularly weak in terms of disclosures, or perhaps missing because it was a newer area. So one to look back on, I think. This year we are seeing the risk pillar, as they call it, and the target and metrics pillar introduced for people. So it's for NHS bodies with more than 500 full-time equivalent employees, or if they've got more than 500 million total operating income or allocation. So it isn't for everyone, and it is intended to be proportionate. So I think that's a really important message that came through in the session around making sure that what you're doing is proportionate to the kind of exposure that you have. But we have done a briefing on the environmental sustainability reporting requirements since then. So do take a look at our website, actually, if you want to have a look at that in a bit more detail. The key points there are around understanding what the required disclosures are, both in the annual governance statement and the performance report elements of the annual report. Include progress against your green plan targets in your annual report, and actually do use that reference to other parts of the report rather than duplicating, because it does come up in lots of different places. So we're trying to make it as easy to read as possible, I think. So one to watch out for, and make sure that you've got information from lots of people in the organisation, perhaps people that wouldn't normally be involved in the financial reporting part of the year or process, I guess. Make sure they're really clear on the arrangements as well, in terms of who needs to provide what information when, what it is. Pretty much the usual theme, I think, of year end, making sure there's a bit of clarity and that everyone who needs to provide something knows what it's going to be. And probably leads me on nicely actually to the second session that I chaired at the Pre-Accounts Planning Conference, which was on the external audit feedback. I thought it was really helpful actually to hear that reflection from the auditor's perspective on what they saw last year. They see an awful lot of different sets of accounts and annual reports. So actually getting a real sense of some of the common themes, what works well, what doesn't work so well, it's really helpful to learn from them on that and get their reflections. Much of what they talked about was the same as in previous years. So things that Debbie's already alluded to around judgments and estimates, income recognition of capital expenditure, and special payments approvals. They were all referred to again as issues that will be particularly looked at this year, as they are in the past, and even more so, I think, in the context that you set out at the beginning, Debbie, around the financial position at the moment as well. And then one of the things that does apply, I think, for the first time for 24-25, which I'll be honest with you, I wasn't aware of until I went to pre-accounts planning, so that was good, was the updated ISA 600. So it is worth noting that auditors may have to undertake new or different procedures when auditing group accounts. So in the NHS, this might be more common where there's a subsidiary or an NHS charity audited by different audit firms, and they might lead to more questions, more document requests, that kind of thing. But it will differ, I think, for different bodies. So as always, speak to your auditors earlier about that, what that means for them. And I know it's something that's come up when you've been talking with our charity group, isn't it, Debbie?
It is, yeah. And one of the things I hadn't twigged, a bit like you, it snuck up on me, this new auditing standard, is that, of course, NHS charities are consolidated into the department's accounts, whether or not they're consolidated into their own corporate trustee NHS bodies accounts. So there'll be bits of the tax forms that relate to NHS charities, and that's used to do the consolidation into the wider accounts. So we've had a few queries from charity auditors who aren't necessarily the ones that audit the corporate trustee bodies, and they've had messages from the NAO to say that the NAO will be in touch and will be sending them group instructions. So that will affect all NHS charities with a corporate trustee, I think. And it'll be interesting to see what happens there. We don't know the answers yet, but of course, NHS charities are generally, their accounts aren't prepared till after the NHS body's accounts are prepared, and the audit again is done later because the Charity Commission's deadline is much later. So one to watch, I think. And if you haven't had a discussion with your charity auditors, it might be one just to see whether they've had that message from the NAO and what they think that they might need to do in addition to the work that they're already doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you say, speaking to the auditors early, they'll know what they need to do. So that's definitely the way to go. And then the other thing I thought is probably worth mentioning is in our year-end material that we've got published on the website, we have published a year-end reminders for audit committees. So that kind of gives quite a relatively easy to read summary of all the areas that were picked up by auditors in previous years. So it gives you a little checklist. So it's quite a nice document to make sure you're aware of all the things that might be cropping up this year. And I would actually encourage people to share it with their audit committees. I know it's been really popular in the past when we've done that, even if it just gives you a starter for 10 and something that you might need to delve into a bit more locally. There are also actually some sessions coming up. We've got our audit conference on lessons from last year and what to expect for 24-25, as well as some good sessions, actually, one on system risk, on counter fraud and procurement. And that's at the end of March. So you might want to flag that with your non-executive directors to come along if you think they would be interested or welcome that, and take a look on our website for the dates on that. But actually, when I think back to pre-accounts planning conference, which I must say feels like a long time ago already, what did come through, I think on all of the sessions perhaps, were questions around IFRS 17. And I will defer to Debbie to tell you a little bit more about IFRS 17, because moving swiftly on from IFRS 16 is your specialist topic in the past, Debbie. I think this is where you're at now, isn't it?
Well, I was happier in IFRS 16 land than I am in IFRS 17, but I'll give it a go. So this is the accounting standard on accounting for insurance contracts. It only applies to the insurer, not the person taking out the insurance policy. And we don't expect it to have a big impact on the NHS. So unlike IFRS 16, where we knew there were loads of leases and it was a case of finding them, under IFRS 17, we don't think there are going to be many, if any, insurance contracts where the NHS body is the insurer, but every NHS body is going to have to go through the process to demonstrate that that is the case. So basically, you're going to have to go through the process to demonstrate that something doesn't exist, which in many ways is harder, I think, than looking for something that you know does exist and you've just got to work out where the paperwork is, or in the case of leases, where the paperwork isn't. So IFRS 17, I keep coming back. It's very complicated, and I have to confess I haven't even worked out the accounting treatment because I just don't think we're going to need to. I keep coming back to thinking about how insurance works for me. So how I take out house insurance, against the risk that something is going to happen to my house, against the risk that next door's apple tree, which I'm looking at now, and it's not far away from my house, is going to fall over one day and land in my bedroom. So I'm insuring my house against a risk that is pre-existing. It's there. The apple tree has been there for longer than we've lived in this house. And one day it may fall over. So, and when it does fall over, it's going to cost me a lot of money to fix my house because, well, I'm guessing it will. So we're looking at a contract that says if this thing that is an existing risk happens, we will pay you some money to compensate you or to allow you to fix whatever's gone wrong. So NHS bodies don't generally do that. They provide healthcare services. ICBs might do things that look a bit like they're providing some sort of cover against a risk, things like paying for void space in leases, but they tend to be more of a financial risk rather than a non-financial risk. So they will get scoped out. So there's an awful lot of things that get scoped out of IFRS 17 straight away, and we're left with trying to find this contract that where potentially an NHS body has said, if this thing happens that is a risk that it predates the contract, then we will compensate you as a result. And that compensation needs to be significant. So, as I said, I keep going back to when I'm taking out the insurance policy, what are they giving me? And I need to sort of flip that on its head almost and think, as an NHS body, am I in the position where I am providing that cover for somebody else against something else? I think the way to approach this is going to be to have a good project plan, to make sure that you've spoken to people in the legal department, people in procurement that are letting out contracts. It will be a case of going through probably all your income streams, because ideally you'll be insuring something and you'll be paid to, insurance companies don't do this for the sheer joy of it, do they? Go through your income streams and strip out, and you'll probably be fairly quickly be able to strip out those that it won't apply to, and you'll be looking at the things that sort of end up in the other income column, I would imagine. And then the other place that people need to look is in their contingent liabilities note, because paying out against something that is an existing risk that may happen that is going to cause somebody a lot of pain is very similar to a contingent liability. So have a look at your contingent liabilities and see what's there and is that an insurance risk. As yet, nobody has owned up to finding they have an insurance contract or they are party to an insurance contract. If and when somebody does find that they are, please could they let us know, let NHS England know, so that the word can be spread to make sure that there's nobody else, because I suspect it will be very specific circumstances and very, very unusual circumstances. The one place that somebody did say at the conferences might be the place to look would be arrangements between NHS bodies and their subsidiaries, that the NHS body might have actually insured a subsidiary against something that was sort of pre-existing before the subsidiary was established. But again, that might end up being in the financial risk side rather than the non-financial risk. So that's IFRS 17. The reason people are getting excited about it is because although it doesn't come into force until 25-26, it's fully retrospectively applied. So if you find one, you're going to end up restating this year's numbers, plus the fact you probably should have a disclosure in your notes somewhere saying that there is this accounting standard out there, we haven't applied it yet, and this is the expected impact on us. And if you want to say, we don't think it's going to have any impact, your auditors are likely to want to say, on what basis are you making that statement?
Well, I thought it was very helpful. And maybe if we do this again next year, you can tell us how your apple tree is doing, whether it's kind of gone over or not. But no, I think it is one that we do need to keep talking about with each other, because once those examples do crop up, that'll make it a bit more easy to understand, I think, as well, won't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm hoping I will be proved right and there will not be any examples, but we shall see.
Definitely.
Following on from the success of the HFMA Health Inequalities Finance Fellows Programme, we have recently launched the Value Improvement Finance Fellows, or VIFs. The The 12-month programme is aimed at senior-level NHS finance professionals who are passionate about implementing value-based healthcare approaches in their organisations and systems. It will give participants the opportunity to attend monthly presentations and learn directly from value-based healthcare experts and from peers who have successfully implemented value-based approaches. Alongside this, fellows will be able to network, get advice and share information with fellow VIFs and gain access to relevant HFMA and Healthcare Value Institute resources and events for the duration of the programme. Applications are open until the 17th of April 2025. For more details about the programme, what will be expected of participants, application eligibility criteria, and to apply, visit hfma.to/VIFs. You can find that link in the show notes. Now, back to the episode.
Other than IFRS 17, Debbie, are there any other technical areas that are important for us to flag this year?
Not for this year, but coming up. So there's been a lot of talk about valuation of property, plant and equipment and intangibles. And it's all got a bit messy, to be honest. So taking intangibles first, because that's fairly easy. As of next year, so as of 25-26, whereas currently in 24-25, intangibles are held at valuation, next year they will be held at cost. So basically your closing balance from this year will become your deemed historical cost. And from that point on, you won't revalue, you will depreciate it, and then it will also be subject to impairment reviews. So you will need to probably up the ante in terms of your impairment reviews, because when you're holding something at revaluation, that effectively does your impairment review for you. So that's intangibles, which will affect some NHS bodies more than others. Some haven't got any intangibles, some have got fairly large numbers, but most it's not a hugely material number. It's been messier for property, plant and equipment. So the whole reason for doing this is to try to reduce the amount of time and effort that NHS bodies and auditors are putting into looking at the valuation of property, plant and equipment. So currently, most NHS bodies get their valuers in pretty much on an annual basis, either to do a desktop or to do a full revaluation. The proposal is that cycle will be broken. And for those of you that are old enough, I don't think you're old enough, Lisa, but I'm definitely old enough to remember when capital accounting was introduced in the NHS. And we used to do a 5-yearly, a quinquennial valuation, and in between there were indices that you applied. And that was job done. They are aiming to go back to something like that. But at the same time, they wanted to look at the whole, how the valuation was done. And as part of that, they wanted to remove the option to hold an asset and an alternative site valuation. At the moment, if you are holding mainly a property on a valuation basis, you can choose, or you can say, actually, we would never have built this building here. And so our alternative site gives us a much better valuation. We would have put it out of town, somewhere with better access, somewhere, I don't know, that wasn't next to the River Thames or next to in the middle of the shopping centre. Or perhaps we would have put it somewhere in the middle of the town because that's got better access. So we can choose an alternative site which would give us a modern equivalent value for our building. Obviously, that involves an awful lot of judgment, and it's not something that is done, and tends to be done in the commercial world, although it's an option there. It's not an option they tend to take up, and it's not something that's done under international public sector accounting standards. The plan is to remove that option and go back to saying you value what you've got, where you've got it. However, whilst the powers that be in FRAB have agreed in principle that they should remove that option, they haven't quite worked out how that applies to land. I can't pretend I entirely understand it, but there is a query about how that's going to apply to land in practice. So Treasury have held off on that for the moment. And what NHS England and the department have said is that we're not going to do anything with the valuation of property, plant and equipment until we know exactly what's happening with both things. So with the timing of the revaluation and whether you're valuing it on the existing site or an alternative site, they're going to roll it all in together because it's going to be big for the NHS. And for some entities who have valued their assets on an alternative site basis, it's going to have a big impact on their numbers. So the proposal is to take all the pain at once rather than sort of a staged approach to the pain, which is the way that the Treasury are doing it. There was a lot of discussion because it was thought that that was going to come in next year, 25, 26. Treasury have done the first bit, so they've changed the valuation cycle, so it's 5 years plus indexation. They've not done the second bit. NHS England and the department have said the NHS is going to not be in line with the rest of public sector, subject to FRAB's agreement, and is going to hold fire on that first bit. So it's a case of wait and see. It's not likely to happen in the NHS. Well, it's not going to happen in the NHS next year. It's not likely even to happen the following year, but it's something that's coming down the line and is going to cause pain when it does arrive.
For me as well, it's the timing of it and trying to get your head around when that, because that seems to be changing. And sometimes you can think, oh, is that something I need to be doing for this year or not, or just to be aware of? So I think clarifying the timelines is really important, but it will be big, won't it, when it does come in?
It will be big when it happens, and the timeline isn't clear. It's definitely not 25, 26 unless FRAB say that the NHS have to take this two-stage approach, which I think we will hear very soon if that is the case. And it's unlikely to be 26, 27, but don't bet on that.
That's fair enough. And I am sad that I can remember the 5-yearly valuations now. So never mind. But, those are quite technical things, aren't they, which you do need to get your head around at the right point in time and understand the impact of that. But there's also an awful lot when we talk about the year end, which isn't technical based. So that whole practicality of both the accounts preparation and the audit and the experience of that can be ever so stressful for people, I think. And the process itself is pretty much pressured at the best of times, I would say. Last year, I know Debbie and I both spoke to a lot of members that recognised the challenges of doing the year end at the same time as the ongoing planning was a really difficult position to be in. And I think that's going to be something that we will see, no doubt, again this year. And our Governance and Audit Committee spoke a lot actually about the pressure they saw on finance teams, and the auditors in particular found that really difficult to come in on and really notice the difference. So with the tight financial position, it's something I think that we need to be mindful of again this year. But also on the flip side, I think finance teams recognise that actually auditors are under a lot of pressure as well. There's a lot more work to do. We alluded to the ISA 600, but that follows other regulation and changes to ISAs that have meant that kind of the amount of work that needs to be done has increased over time. And there is still the issue, isn't there, around auditor capacity at the moment. And I know there was the recent backstop date for local authorities who have got a much bigger backlog than in the NHS to clear. I think that was at the end of February. So I'm guessing that there would have been a lot more limited amounts of interim audits along the way. So the pressure does all build up for the year end, really. So I think it is worth being mindful of working collaboratively and openly, but in quite a kind of understanding of being kind to each other way at the moment. Everyone is trying to do their best, aren't they? So I think it's trying to find the things that make your life as easy as possible in perhaps a difficult context. And that's no different to in previous years. So lots of you will have seen some of the briefings we've put together in the past and updated around how to do good working papers, how you work well together across finance, auditors and non-execs. So perhaps taking a look at those, again, is not a bad place to start. And actually, sometimes when you've got new people to the team, it's really helpful to have something to be able to point them in the direction of. So again, I'd have a look at those. But I don't think there are any major surprises in that material. It is pretty much around communication, transparency, clarity and talking to each other. But actually, sometimes when you have the opportunity to read some of the tips that people themselves have found along the way, it is quite helpful, I think. But it's definitely something that we're mindful of. And if people out there have got any ideas how we can best support them, then do get in touch. But it's been coming up for a while. It's something that comes up a lot, isn't it, Debbie? And that came up in the year-end survey that you looked at, didn't it?
I think it was the number one comment really was that the timing of the planning coinciding with the year end just was not helpful and put an awful lot of pressure on fairly small teams. And like you say, every layer has got their own pressure, and obviously this year we've got the added pressure of colleagues in NHS England and the department not quite knowing what their future is going to look like. And we've got the additional pressure of the Public Accounts Committee continually saying that they want the department's accounts laid before Parliament, before recess. So, the pressure to speed up the reporting processes is still there. So, I think, like you said, Lisa, it's about being aware and just being kind to each other, and it's not just you that's got pressures. Other people have got other pressures, but equally difficult pressures to deal with. Other messages from the survey. Again, like you say, it's not rocket science, but contact people early if you're asking for information. Be aware that if you're contacting a local authority because you want information about pool budgets, or you've got pension arrangements with local authorities, that, like Lisa said, their audited position is much, much worse than in the NHS. There's hundreds of accounts that are now being disclaimed, so they're now having to go through the process of working their way back from a disclaimed opinion to a clean audit opinion. Get drafting done as early as possible. That really helps, particularly the annual report. As Lisa said earlier, the big change this year is going to be in the annual report rather than the accounts, with the snappily titled TCFD stuff. NHS England has actually put a suggested date to get draft annual reports to auditors in their timetable. And then be aware of wider issues. So one thing that, again, Lisa mentioned it earlier, is managing public money and being required to get approvals for special severance payments before they're agreed with the individual concerned. Be aware that takes time. Make sure that your HR colleagues and other management staff are aware that they can't just agree an arrangement with somebody, that if there is anything that's over and above the contractual amounts, that needs to go to NHS England, the department, and then Treasury for approval, and that's going to take some time. The consolidated provider accounts last year included reference to, I think it was 3 or 4 cases where that approval was still outstanding from Treasury, and they were the audit report referred to those. And then, it's all about communications and the culture of doing the right thing. And I think they're both as important as actually understanding the technical accounting and thinking about whether your apple tree is going to fall into your bedroom window. So I think probably from my perspective, that's about all I've got to say on the year end.
It's kind of just nice to know that everyone's going through the same thing, isn't it, at the same time, and that if things do arise, you're not alone. So, people in your region, people across the country have probably got a similar issue to you, even if you think it's quite an unusual issue. So it is worth sharing that. But no, nothing else to say from me other than a massive good luck, I think, to people undertaking the year-end process. I know it's something that we do go through every year, but it does take a lot of time and effort to get right. And when it does go right, it is quite rewarding, I think, to get to the end of that process. But good luck from me.
Yeah, and good luck from me as well. And if you do need to vent, or if you want to know whether we've heard of something happening at another end of the country to you, then just get in touch and we'll do our best to help. And if you think there is anything else we can do, then again, let us know and we'll do our best to help. But good luck.
That wraps up this episode of HFMA Talk. A big thank you to Debbie Paterson and Lisa Robertson for sharing their insights on the 2024-25 financial year-end process and the key considerations for NHS finance teams. If you'd like to explore the resources mentioned in today's discussion, be sure to visit hfma.to/year-end 24-25, where you'll find guidance, tools and support to help navigate the year-end successfully. Don't forget to subscribe to HFMA Talk so you never miss an episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon with more updates on the latest in NHS finance.